Welcome back, everyone. So, keeping in the trend, I am going to be doing a recap of the second game that I played today here in the Canada's tournament in Madrid, Spain. So, obviously, lost a very difficult game yesterday against Fabiano Caruana with the black pieces. Unfortunately, there was one mistake that I made. So, how do you bounce back from such a loss? Well, the way you bounce back is you try to keep it simple. So, I think the saying is keep it simple, stupid. KISS, I believe, is the acronym if I remember correctly. So, anyway, away we go. So, I started by playing E4 against Teimour Radjabov, another player who I've played many times. I think I first met him in 1997 at the World Youth Chess Championship in Caen, France, so I've known him for a very long time. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, and Teimour plays the Berlin, just like I played against Fabiano yesterday. So I choose to play d3. I do not play bishop c6 like Fabiano did against me. Bishop c5, and now I play the move knight bd2. And here Teimour sank into a deep thought. In fact, I think he thought for about 20 minutes before playing his next move. And I was very surprised by this decision because I assumed Teimour would play his usual setup with d6 and castles, but instead he goes for a very direct and very testing line with knight d4. We trade on d4. C3 is played, bishop b6, and now I play d4, c6, all very standard, all been played many times before. Take on e5, take on b5, I take on f6, queen takes, castles, castles, and now I play this move queen h5. Now the inspiration for this variation was a game played in the Speed Chess Championship between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Levon Aronian. Now, with the help of computers, generally, there are many ways to equalize such positions. What I was banking on by playing this queen h5 line is that Teimour had probably not looked at this, and he probably would not see the correct move here. He would probably play the move which Levon actually played in the blitz game, which is queen c6. The computer here actually says that after d5, queen takes d5, and the move bishop g4, black is completely equal here with no problems whatsoever. Again, I won't go into depth in terms of what it is, but I will say that having played this in the game, there is zero chance that I can ever use this again, and for that matter, anyone else can use this line or the specific setup with queen h5 again, because they will solve it very, very quickly. However, Teimour was clearly out of his preparation, a little bit unsure of himself, and he played the very natural, very human-looking move, queen c6, to guard the pawn, because of course, why would you want to sacrifice a pawn? It makes no sense. So he plays queen c6, I go rook e1, we got rook e8 here, knight f3, and now Teimour actually decides to play d5. Now in this position, black has a couple of issues. The first issue is that he has the double b pawns, but the second issue is this light square bishop has not been developed. Additionally, if you play d6 here, this actually loses on the spot because there's now knight to g5, attacking both the pawns on f7 and h7 here, and this is simply GG's. So in this position, Teimour has to come up with a better move, and he plays the logical move d5 here, trying to release the pressure. Now here I thought for a long time, and I decided to take with the pawn. The main reason I took with the pawn was that Teimour had used a lot of time, and as I alluded to it in my previous recap, there's no increment in the first time control. So the fact that Teimour had used so much time, I wanted to keep queens on the board. Now I suspected that queen takes d5 was the best move, but after queen takes trade, rook e1, knight e1, bishop f5, while I think white is better, this d pawn is going to be coming under attack very, very quickly, and I wasn't really convinced that there's anything special here, and additionally the moves become very easy for black. So that was the main reason that I chose to take with the pawn. Teimour trades the rooks on e1, and now he plays queen c4. Very logical move, by the way. The idea is to play bishop g4 and then bring the rook to e8. So now I play this move h3, and there was a certain moment in the game when I started shaking my head and I was very annoyed with myself because I actually realized that h3 was not the best move. What I should have done is I probably should have played this move queen to e5 because there's a very tricky idea here. If black plays bishop d7, I can maybe go queen g3. I can also maybe play b3, but the line that I realized after I played h3 was if queen g3, queen takes d5, bishop h6, g6 here. I thought there was actually a trick, but it doesn't work. Oh, so maybe I made the right decision. Obviously, I've not looked at the game yet, so this is my first time running through it. I thought that rook d1 was winning, but in fact, it's losing. Oh, it's losing because black can play the in-between move rook to e8. If black were to play queen d1, queen to e5 is actually, I think, winning here because after f6, there's queen e7, and the only way for black to stop the checkmate is to give up the queen. Now, the game goes on here, but white is much better. However, our Silicon friend points out that after rook e8, I cannot take the queen because of the back rank checkmate, and therefore black is actually much better in this position. So maybe I made the right decision in retrospect by playing h3. So I play h3 to stop bishop g4, Teimour develops, and now I played queen f3 after a very long think. When I was calculating this h3 move, my idea was to play knight f3 here, and after rook to e8, I was going to play bishop to e3, but after trade and the very simple move f6 here, stopping the knight jump to either e5 or g5, black is completely fine. So after using a lot of time here and becoming very frustrated with myself, I played this move queen f3. Rook t8 was played by Teimour, and now I played bishop e3. Initially, I wanted to play knight d3, but unfortunately, after rook to e4, black is simply going to capture the pawn on d5, and the position is very equal. So I have to go bishop e3, get rid of a set of bishops. We trade, rook to e5 is played, and now here I make a mistake. I play this move d6. Now, the computers, of course, point out that after rook d1, if black plays rook f5, there's a very nice in-between move, rook to d4, and white keeps a fairly significant advantage. During the game, I did not see this move. The only moves I saw here were b3, but after queen takes c3, queen e2, rook e5, maybe white's marginally better, but it's nothing special. And if I go queen g3, after a move like rook to f1, king h2, and h6, I think that white maybe could end up in a little trouble here. Although again, computer says after rook d4, white's better, so what do I know? At any rate, I played d6, trying to put pressure on the pawn on b7. Teimour plays queen d5. I go rook d1. We trade, rook e3, and now I play rook d5. And at this moment, I started to get mildly optimistic because after this move f6, I have this nice idea with rook c5 here, and black cannot play bishop c6. He'd love to stop me from infiltrating on c7, but after bishop c6, I can sack the rook, push the pawn. Rook cannot go back, and after rook d3, I play knight d4. I create the shield, and now I make a queen and win the game. So Teimour has to play rook e6, but now after rook c7, rook takes d6, rook b7, a6. Now I get knight d4, and with this great knight outpost in the center of the board on d4, combined with these weak pawns on a6 and b5, white is marginally better. Now, as I've said before, in this event, there is no increment, unlike, say, the FIDE Grand Prix in Berlin or almost every other event that I've played in recent memory. So Teimour here was down to very little time, and he had to start making moves very quickly, and the move he plays here is a mistake. He plays this move h5, which is a fairly significant blunder. I thought if Teimour had played g5 here, king f2, h5, let's say I go king e3, h4, I think black should be completely fine because now the chain is on the dark squares and my pawns are on light squares, so long term, the bishop from d7 should be able to attack the pawns on g2 and h3. However, Teimour plays h5, and now I'm able to play h4, and after g5, g3, my pawns are fixed on the dark squares, so the bishop on d7 can no longer attack them. So king f7 is played, king f2, king g6, king e3, just improving our kings. Now here Teimour plays rook d5, I go rook a7, and now in the serious time pressure he makes, or actually not here, sorry, it goes rook d6, b3, bishop to e6, rook c7, and now he plays rook d5 in his time pressure, making a serious error. Again, I think if Teimour had waited with bishop d7, I can probably go c4, and it feels scary with the passed c-pawn, but after a move like bishop g4, or maybe even bishop h3, once I go c5, rook d5, the rook is going to go to e5, and I think black should have enough compensation or counterplay for this passed c-pawn. Again, with no increment, Teimour had to just make moves quickly, so he goes rook d5, and now after rook c6, black starts to come under pressure here. The a6 pawn is going to be falling, and now black will be suffering for pretty much the rest of the game. Rook e5 check, king f2 is played, goes here, I take, we trade, he goes rook e4, and now my 40th move, I play rook d6, and Teimour plays bishop c8. I play rook d8, bishop g4, and we've reached the time control, the dust is cleared, and I have an extra pawn. Additionally, I have 3 pawns on the queen side versus 1, so this should be close to winning. However, at this point in the game, I started dilly-dallying, for lack of a better word, and I just thought, you know what, I'm going to try to play this a little bit like Magnus, just grind it, try to improve the position slowly, but also make sure that there's no time pressure in the second control in the next 20 moves. You have 1 hour for 20 moves, but no increment in the second control either, so I started dilly-dallying and making some random moves, which is why I'll just go through the moves pretty quickly. Nothing much is happening. Now here I let Teimour get the bishop to e8, I go knight f3, rook e6, and now it gets very tricky to play. What I probably should have done was I probably should have just gone for I probably should have done something where I went for this pawn right away, because now after rook e6, it's going to be very hard to get too connected. What I'd love to do here is play c4 and have connected B and A pawns throughout the board, or vice versa, something like A4 and something with connected A and B not A and B, sorry, connected B and C pawns running up the board. But it's going to be very hard to do that because if I push C4, he has rook A6 here, and I'm going to lose the pawn on A2. If I go A4, he just trades and wins the pawn. So with this pawn on B5 and this bishop on E8, it's very hard to get two connected passed pawns. So I play rook A7 here. We get rook E4, rook A8, a lot of dilly-dallying, rook D8, rook E7, rook D2, rook E4, D5, king G6. Play A3 here, trying to improve the position. Now I figure, well, the pawn's on a dark square. I can still go knight D4, knight B5 later. Rook E7 is played, knight D4. Now Teimour goes back. He cannot go to C7 or A7 because now when I take on B5, I guard either pawn, and after the trade with C4, I have two connected, and this should be a technically winning rook and pawn endgame for him. So Teimour plays rook E4, correct move. I take, he takes on H4. Now, one of the reasons I did not do this earlier in one of the lines with the bishop on the other diagonal is I thought with the bishop on C8, it would really support the pawn push with H4 and H3 at some point, whereas here with the bishop on E8, there's no support for the H pawn. So I play knight D4 back, rook H2, king G3, rook D2 played by Teimour. I go C4 here. Basically, black is threatening rook D3 to win the pawn on C3. So I now connect the pawns. I also guard the rook on D5, so I can always move the knight away since C4 guards the rook. Rook D3 check is played. I go king H4. Bishop F7, and now I have to be very careful to play rook D8, not rook D6 here, because if I play rook D6, after this move, bishop E6, threatening rook H3 checkmate, I cannot take with the knight because I lose my rook, and after rook E6, rook D4, king H3, rook D3 check, king H4, rook B3, black draws very, very comfortably. So I still have to be very careful here. So I play rook D8, rook D1 is played by Teimour. Now I have to start pushing A pawns because again, black is going to try to go rook H1, create counterplay with the H pawn. So I play A4, rook H1, king G3, H4. And now here I make a fairly serious error. I play this move king G2, which in essence gives away the win. What I should have done here is apparently I should have played king F4, but after king F4, I thought there were ideas like rook B1. I also thought rook G1 with H3, H2 was very scary, and so I didn't play this. Instead, I play king G2, which is a fatal error because here black has a way to save the game. Now, there's only one move here that saves the game. So for us humans, when we play the game of chess, whether it's an opening, middle game, or an end game, we're always looking for logical concepts, logical ideas. So in this position, the logical moves that occurred to me were rook C1, rook D1, or rook A1. Now, C1 and A1 both make sense because, of course, I have two connected pass pawns that are running up the board on A4 and C4. But as the computer points out, rook B1 is the drawing move. You do not put the rook behind either of the two pass pawns which are marching up the board. And the reason for that is that after A5, you can now go king G5. And if I play A6 here, I think king G4... Actually, maybe not king G4. I guess rook A1 now is saving it. But the point is that if I try something like C5, for example, now black goes king G4. And with the rook on B1 here, black is able to just check forever, say C6, check. Actually check here, and now black just checks forever on B1 and B2, and he saves the game. Whereas if you put the rook on C1, for example, you don't have a check, you don't have this yo-yo with rook C2 and rook C1 because the knight covers the square. So rook B1 would have actually saved the game for Teimour, but again, he was getting a little bit low on time in second control. Obviously, we've been playing for 5 hours plus at this point, and so it's not a surprise that he played rook C1 because there's also a very tricky threat here. Let's just say I play a move like rook H8 to highlight the point. Black can now sack the bishop, and the rook is attacking both the knight on D4 and the pawn on A4. And after rook takes H4, rook H4, we reach rook and knight versus rook, which is a theoretical draw. So rook C1 is a very logical move. You have this idea with bishop C4, but it is a mistake because now I play A5. Teimour plays king H5. He could have played rook A1 here, but after rook A1, my intention was to go C5, chucking the A5 pawn, and now I was going to go C6, followed by B4, B5, and I think that white is winning here. In fact, actually, computer agrees. It says bishop D5, king H2, bishop C6 is best, but after knight C6, I'll be able to save the pawn on B3, and this should be a technical win as well. So here after A5, Teimour goes king H5. Same idea, by the way, to go king G4, but with the rook on C1, there's no rook C2 check, so simply doesn't work. So here I find this amazing move, king F2. Now, I don't remember why exactly I played king F2. I think I thought that basically at this point in time, if I go king F2, H3 is not really a threat here because I can just go king G3 to win the pawn. There's no check, and additionally, I dodge the light square checks. For example, say rook A1, C5, takes C6, there are no checks because the king is on a dark square. So I just played king F2, and it turns out the king F2 is actually the best move here. Teimour plays king g4, I go rook f8. Now he plays h3, which is kind of the final mistake. He probably had to sack on c4 here, but after takes, rook c4, for example, after rook g8, king f4, knight e2, king e5, or king f5, I should say, after a6, rook a4, rook a8, this should be winning. Now, I wasn't 100% sure if this was a clean win or not, but I assumed that it had to be winning, and the computer actually confirms what I thought during the game. Instead, Teimour plays h3. He was down to maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes here. Again, no increment in the second time control either, so he just has to go. Actually, sorry, no, there was increment. This was a third time control, but he was still very low on time. So he plays h3 here, which essentially loses the game because now I have rook f7, h2, and I have this very nice in-between move, rook g7 check. I do not go rook h7. Now, this might have been winning as well, but after playing for 6 hours, you just don't want to go into this endgame, because if you miscalculate one thing, you're probably going to end up drawing. Now, the computer says this is winning as well with the 3 connected, but there's no way I was going to go for this. Instead, I play rook g7 check. If the king goes to any of the h squares, like h3, I just check, king g4, and collect the pawn. Same thing for the other 2 squares as well. I just check and collect, and I win the game. And after king f4, I play knight e2 check. King e5, not king e4, by the way, because then I can go rook h7. And after black queens, I have knight g3, forking the king and the queen. So he goes king e5. Now I have knight g3 anyway to stop the pawn. Rook c2, king f3, rook c3, king g2, and now Teimour takes. Again, last gasp effort to try and salvage something, but unfortunately with 2 pawns instead of just 1, I have a very nice way to technically win this game. Rook a3 is played, a7, rook guards the pawn. Teimour goes king d4, trying to gobble the pawn, get the king back, and win both c4 and a7, but now I play knight f5, king takes c4, and now I go rook b7, essentially finishing off the game here. Black really has nothing he can do here. My idea is very straightforward. If king c5, I go knight e7, and I just want to go knight c8 next. So if he checks and I play king h1, if this pawn was on f5, there might be counterplay, but the pawn unfortunately on f6 is too far back here. So after he plays f5, I can still go knight c8, guarding the pawn, and after f4, I just go rook b8, f3, I make the queen, and unfortunately, after f2, I have rook a1, and I just gobble the 2 pawns, and I win the game. So after king c5, knight e7 here, after knight e7 here, Teimour resigns the game due to that idea with knight c8 and rook b8. And I get my first win in the second round of the candidates. I move back to an even score, 1 win, 1 loss. Tomorrow, I will be playing with the black piece against Alireza Firouzja in the 3rd round. I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap. Obviously, I'm a little bit tired. The game went almost 7 hours. But anything for all of you guys on YouTube. So I hope you enjoyed this recap, and hopefully I'll be doing more in the near future. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Peace.